Good morning, YouTube. This is Kelsey from Kels Reads Things, and I am very excited to finally be discussing today Kingdom of Ash, the final novel in the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas. Now, I didn't quite get to halfway, unfortunately, by the time I wanted to make this video today, but I think I have enough content and I'm far enough along in the story to at least give you an idea of my thoughts. So far, it is a 5-star book. I will say the last, from books 3 to now, have been probably fantastic in my opinion, some of my favorites. But overall, I think this one so far is my absolute favorite. It's kind of tied between this one and either Queen of Shadows or Kingdom of Ash. Or, yeah, between those two. It's very, very close. So, just to give you an idea of what is happening now for Aelin and her friends. So, for the time being, Aelin has been captured by the Queen of the Fae, and she's being tortured by her lackey, so to speak, her very cruel lackey known as Cairn. Being tortured for information about the word keys, which if you have all three together, you know that you can control the inner dimensions and the lock against keeping the gods in place, so to speak. And she's torturing Aelin for information about it. Aelin is currently in a coffin of iron, and as you know from traditional Fae stories, iron and Fae do not mix well. So all of Aelin's powers, also like her fire magic, is just being contained right now, and it's extremely a lot of pressure on her and on her bones and on her blood, on her body in general. It's just not going well for Aelin. She is not having a good time at the start of this book. However, one of my favorite quotes from Aelin so far is, "You do not yield." She is refusing to give information. She is refusing to give in, though she does mention that every day that she's being tortured and then put to sleep and then healed by healers all over again, her resilience is starting to almost dwindle. So that's where Aelin is at this time. Rowan, her mate and husband, as well as Lorcan, Gabrielle, and Elide are searching for Aelin in order to rescue her. Adian and Lysandra are in Terrasen right now, and they are fighting the good fight. They are currently in battle trying to defend Terrasen against Erawan and his forces. And right now, Adian is extremely upset with Lysandra to the point of cruelty, because Lysandra and Aelin discussed the fact that Aelin was likely going to have to sacrifice herself to the lock in order to reseal Erawan, to completely defeat him, and to basically restore order and peace to Terrasen and the remainder of the continent. So, Adian is pretty upset right now because he was left out of all of this information. He was left out of the planning, and he's lost his cousin of whom he was very, very close to, Aelin. So he is being very hostile with Lysandra at this point, which is sad because their love story was starting to form in the last book. But we'll see what happens with that. I'm only on page, I think, like 380 something. Yeah, I'm about to be on 370 out of 984 pages, so hopefully by next Friday I'll read the whole thing, and if not, I'll be willing to do this video in 3 parts, because again, this is a massive book. And let me just say, a little off topic, I'm in absolute love with the hardcover edition. Sarah J. Maas's initials are here, and Aelin's sword is right there, so that just little extra specialness to the book that makes me love it even more. Okay, to continue on with the plot and where everyone is, Manon the 13, her clan, and Dorian are currently attempting to locate the Croken witches in order to convince them to ally with them to fight the good fight against Erawan, to defend Terrasen, and to eventually have what's known as the Waste, their original home, back for themselves. Only there's a little bit of problem, as I think I've mentioned before, all the witch clans despise each other, but they especially despise the Crochans. I'm not really sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Please forgive me if I am not. However, Manon is the rightful heir, as we came to find out in the last book, I want to say it was, before Tower of Dawn. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Empire of Storms, I think. Yeah, is when we find out that she is the rightful heir. So they're trying to find them, number one, and convince them. And along the way, Dorian kind of has his own secret plans. And I don't want to give too much away, so I won't dive into that, but Dorian has his own plan for how to defeat Erewhon, and potentially next week I will kind of dive into that a little bit more. And finally, Kale, Irene, Nezrin, and Sartaq are sailing back from the continent they were at, and they are sailing to Anil, which is Kale's birthplace. Very cold, very cruel, very unfeeling father, and they're trying to basically earn their allies as well against Erewhon and defend that continent as well. So a lot of fighting is happening at this point, a lot of defense, and a lot of tempers are rising between characters, because that's what war does. It divides. But I'm hoping that by the end we'll see a lot more conversion and humility, as well as working together to make this cause possible. Okay, so the pacing so far is fantastic. I have been on my toes and on edge of my seat pretty much since the first sentence. I definitely wanted to know what's going on with Aelin, because as you know previously from my other video, Tower of Dawn, Aelin is not the center of that story at all. So it was exciting to, and also very stressful to find out where Aelin is at this point in her story, because this is mostly her story. It's her story of, you know, being an orphan princess to assassin to slave to assassin again to rightful princess, and now she is the queen. So definitely excited to see where she is going to end up by the end of this story. The character development, speaking of Aelin, Aelin's resilience and her strength have just been extremely inspirational for me. She is a beacon of hope, and just, she's fantastic. Some characters I'm concerned about include Aedion. I really feel like he's regressed a little bit, and it's because of his anger. He's similar to his cousin in that regard. I can completely understand where he's coming from, but the point of cruelty he's shown toward Lysandra is just not okay with me, and I don't think it's really okay with anyone that's grown to love these characters. But again, characters are flawed for a reason, and that's what makes them good, and that's what makes the story real and realistic and relatable, is because these characters are flawed just like you and I are. So I'll just get a little bit fluffy about that. I will say I think that he is going to develop as well. And I'm going to go ahead and just touch on one of my favorite quotes so far I've read from the story. This is Manon addressing witches. They do end up finding and locating the Crocans at this point in the story, and she's trying to convince them to rally with her. So here's the quote. "You are my people. Whether my grandmother decrees it or not, you are my people and always will be. But I will fight against you if need be to ensure that there is a future for those who cannot fight for themselves. Too long have we preyed on the weak," and she's talking about the 13, but witches in general as well, "and relish doing so. It is time that we become better than our foremothers. There's a better world out there, and I will fight for it. Will you?" And I thought that was just very, very powerful, especially because when we're first introduced to Manon in, I think it's book 3, yes, I believe it's book 3, she's just completely cruel and just out of left field. I was like, who is this witch and what is she doing in my story about Aelin? Let's get back to Aelin. But I have grown to love Manon as one of my favorite characters, because I believe she has developed the most. We were introduced to her as this cruel, practically evil being, very, very selfish, very self-absorbed, to being someone who's fighting the good fight for those who can't fight themselves. So I'm extremely proud of Manon and her development, and that's one thing that I loved about this entire series and about Sarah J. Maas's writing in general. If you enjoy character relationships in your readings and character development, then you will absolutely love these stories, especially if you like epic fantasy. And I'm going to touch on that just a little bit today, the differences between one of Sarah J. Maas's works and the other. I've mentioned it before, A Court of Thorns and Roses. It's probably my absolute favorite of the two. I love both of them, but I prefer ACOTAR. That's the internet name for it, ACOTAR, because I believe it's more character relationship and personal self based in terms of the story, whereas Throne of Glass is more about the plot and it's more about an epic fantasy. In fact, it reminds me quite a bit of Game of Thrones because you have a lot of different characters introduced in Throne of Glass just like you do in Game of Thrones, and they're all kind of intricate into each other. Now, I will say that's something I really appreciate about the Throne of Glass series. So I just kind of wanted to touch on a little bit of the differences. I unfortunately have not yet read Crescent City. House of Earth and Blood, I think is the title. I do plan to read it at some point this year, even if I just have to listen to the audiobook. I promise I will be discussing it at some point in my videos. But overall, so far, like I said, I'm almost halfway through. I'm still at a little more than a third of the way through, and so far it's been a wild ride. Lots of character development, even just in the last book, and that's something that I very much appreciate about Sarah J. Maas. And her female protagonists are all extremely strong in their own unique ways, and they all have their own individual skills, personalities, strengths and weaknesses. And I one thing that I'm frustrated with a lot with young adult literature is a lot of times you have the same cookie cutter characters, and there's nothing wrong with having a strong female resilient character. I love that, but they all kind of blend together at one point. But Sarah J. Maas is not she's not known for that. She's very good at creating her own individual characters, and that's something I've always loved and always will appreciate about her as an author and as an artist. Alrighty guys, that being said, that's all I have today, because like I said, I'm only about a third of the way through, and I want to give this book its justice and really, really express how much I enjoy it in a well-developed and thought-out manner. So thank you for watching. Stay tuned. Hopefully I'll have another video ready for you next Friday. Possibly the last video. We'll just have to see. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful Friday. Bye guys.